The Alpha's roar shook the chandeliers. 3 hours. 3 endless hours of his heir's cries echoing through the marble halls. Warriors flinched, servants wept. Even the moon seemed to hide behind the clouds. And then, a sound no one expected. Footsteps, soft, bare. A poor Omega girl stepped forward from the crowd, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with something both foolish and holy. "Stop her," the beta barked. But before the guards could move, she whispered, "Let me try." The hall went still. Alpha Ryden Voss, the conqueror of 1,000 battles, could only stare as the girl crossed the floor toward him. Her scent was of lavender and smoke, the kind that didn't beg, but dared. Without waiting for permission, she took the crying pup from his arms. The court gasped, horror rippling like thunder through the crowd. She held the child close and began to hum, a low, trembling lullaby, ancient, lunar, forbidden. Within seconds, the cries faltered. The pup's little fists unclenched, his breathing softened. Then, silence. The entire castle froze. Ryden's chest heaved, the weight of command forgotten. The Omega lifted her gaze to his, eyes wet but fearless. "He wasn't sick, Alpha," she whispered. "He was lonely. He could feel your grief." And just like that, the mightiest Alpha in the North felt his world crack open, not from battle, but from tenderness. For the first time in years, he bowed his head. Chapter 1. The Unending Wail. The cry split the night like a blade. It wasn't a newborn's soft sob. It was a storm, raw and wild, echoing through the stone ribs of Moonfang Castle until even the torches seemed to flicker with unease. Servants ran like shadows between the halls carrying milk, warm blankets, and whispered prayers. Yet nothing worked. The Alpha's heir, barely 6 weeks old, cried as if the world itself had betrayed him. Alpha Ryden Voss stood at the center of the chaos, fists clenched, eyes like dark steel. His chest rose and fell in harsh rhythm, every breath scraping against the wall of pride that had long protected him. For 3 endless hours, the sound had clawed through his composure, shredding what remained of his patience. "Try again," he ordered, voice low but trembling with restrained fury. "Yes, Alpha," murmured the nursemaid, her hands shaking as she took the pup in her arms. She rocked the child gently, whispering lullabies, her scent sweet with fear. But the baby only screamed louder, as though rejecting the very world that held him. By the time the moon reached its peak, the great halls of Silvercrest had fallen into a kind of stunned exhaustion. The warriors in the corridor stood still, heads bowed, afraid to breathe too loudly. Even the beta dared not speak. "He's supposed to be strong," Ryden thought bitterly, staring at the cradle that refused to hold peace. "My son, my heir, my bloodline." But the cries pierced deeper. Each wail sounded too much like loss, too much like her. Luna Sarah's name pulsed in his chest like an open wound. She had died bringing this child into the world, her last words a whisper of apology. Since then, every cry from his son had sounded like a ghost calling his name. He had fought wars, torn through rival packs, stood over the ashes of kingdoms. But here, in his own nursery, the Alpha of the North stood helpless. The servants whispered near the door. "Perhaps it's a curse," one muttered, "for the Luna's blood spilled under the red moon." Another shushed her, but the word curse had already reached Ryden's ears. He turned slowly. "Who said that?" The air thickened. No one answered. "Speak!" His roar shook the chandeliers. The child wailed harder, the sound nearly cracking through the stone itself. For a heartbeat, the Alpha's face twisted with something beyond anger, something closer to fear. "Why can't I stop it?" The nursemaid knelt, trembling. "Alpha, maybe he feels something. Maybe... Enough." Ryden's tone was a blade's edge. "Leave." One by one, the servants fled the chamber, leaving him alone with the child and the echo of his failure. As silence settled, Save for the soft, ragged cries, Ryden moved closer. He hesitated before the cradle, his massive hands hovering, unsure how to touch something so fragile. He could crush bones with those hands, command armies, but not this. Not this small, crying life. "Stop," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking for the first time in years. "Please, stop!" The pup's tiny fist reached upward, catching the edge of his cloak. For an instant, the alpha froze because of that warmth, that tiny, fragile grip. And then the cry broke into a hiccup, a single breath of quiet. But before Ryden could exhale, the wail began again. Sharper, louder, desperate. He turned away, jaw tight, eyes burning. Beneath the moonlight spilling through the arched window, his shadow stretched across the room, tall, unyielding, but fractured down the middle. The sound of his son's crying filled every crack, and that's when he realized power meant nothing here, not against grief. Chapter 2. The Fractured Alpha. By dawn, the castle was no longer a home. It was a cage of echoes. The sun crawled over the frost-tipped mountains, spilling gold through the high windows, but warmth refused to enter the alpha's chambers. The pup still cried. The sound had become a rhythm in Ryden's veins, an unending chant of helplessness. Outside, the guards exchanged weary glances. Inside, the once mighty alpha sat by the cradle, his eyes hollow from sleeplessness. 3 hours, Beta Corin murmured quietly from the doorway. "Alpha, he hasn't stopped." Ryden didn't look up. "I'm aware. Should I fetch the healers again?" "They've done nothing but waste breath." There was a pause, then a low sigh. "Maybe he misses her." The words cut too deep. Ryden's jaw flexed. "Don't speak her name." Corin bowed and left without another word. The moment the door shut, Ryden let the mask fall. His shoulders slumped, hands trembling as he rubbed his face. The scent of milk, tears, and cold air filled the room. It smelled like sorrow had taken root here. He glanced at the empty chair beside the cradle, the one where Sarah had once dreamed aloud of their future. Her voice still lived in these walls. He hated that. He needed silence. But silence refused to come. "Why can't you stop crying?" he muttered, standing once more over the cradle. "You're supposed to be strong. My son. My heir." The baby's cry wavered, as if answering him, then grew louder. Ryden turned away. His wolf stirred under his skin, pacing restlessly. Power surged in him, demanding control, dominance. But over what? A child? The alpha in him raged. The father in him broke. And somewhere between those two truths, he heard something. A whisper outside the chamber. A woman's voice, faint, hesitant. "Has no one helped him yet?" He frowned, catching the scent of cinnamon and soap. Omega scent. Lowborn. From the kitchens. What was she doing near his chambers? Before he could investigate, one of the guards hissed, "Stay back, girl. You'll lose your position if the alpha sees you here." Her voice trembled. "But he's been crying for hours." Ryden's growl silenced them both. "Go back to your duties," he thundered. The footsteps retreated, but the scent lingered. Soft. Familiar in a way he couldn't explain. Still, he dismissed it. Omegas were beneath notice. His world was made of warriors and bloodlines, not whispers and lullabies. Even so, her voice had cut through the noise like a thread of calm. The baby whimpered again. Ryden exhaled slowly, lowering himself beside the cradle once more. He tried to hum the tune Sarah used to sing, but the sound cracked halfway through. Because the truth was, he couldn't remember it anymore. And just like that, the tears returned, louder, stronger, almost pleading. Ryden's throat tightened. For a fleeting second, he thought he heard her voice again, soft and sure. "Maybe he feels your grief." He closed his eyes. Impossible. Yet as the minutes passed, that scent, cinnamon, and soap, seemed to drift closer again. Somewhere down in the kitchens, an Omega girl wiped her hands on her apron, heart pounding as the Alpha's roar echoed through the castle. And though she knew it was madness, she whispered to herself, "If no one helps that child, I will." Chapter 3. The Weight of Silence. That night, the castle grew quiet, but not peaceful. Snow fell outside, soft and relentless, covering the spires of Silvercrest in white. Inside, the torches burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe. The pup still cried, though weaker now, exhausted from the day's endless sobbing. Ryden stood by the window, looking out over the courtyard where the soldiers trained by moonlight. He envied their certainty, the clarity of a sword in hand, the simplicity of a command obeyed. Here in this nursery there were no victories, only ghosts. As the silence stretched, he whispered to the cold glass, "What am I missing?" No answer came, only that fragile, broken sound from the cradle. He walked closer, kneeling beside his son. The child's cheeks were flushed, tiny chest rising and falling too fast. Ryden brushed a finger near his arm but stopped himself before touching him. His hands, those same hands that had ended battles, seemed too monstrous for gentleness. He needs his mother. The thought was poison. He rose, pacing. "You'll learn strength," he said quietly. "You'll grow without needing comfort. That's what an alpha does." But the words felt hollow. The child whimpered as if disagreeing. That's when Ryden felt it, a tug in the air, faint but real. The same scent again, cinnamon and soap. It drifted through the crack of the half-open door. He turned sharply. "Who's there?" No one answered, only the faint shuffle of feet fading away. Ryden clenched his jaw, walking to the door, but something made him stop. The pup had gone quiet. For the first time in hours, silence. He turned back slowly. The child's eyes were half open, silver like moonlight on water. They looked peaceful. Ryden stood there, heart pounding. He didn't understand. But in that moment, beneath the falling snow, the dying firelight, and the ghost of a scent not his own, something inside him shifted. He realized the silence wasn't victory. It was warning. Because silence, in Moonfang Castle, never lasted long. And somewhere below, an Omega girl was already making a choice that would change everything. Chapter 4. The Girl Beneath the Stairs. The cry reached even the kitchens. It rolled down through stone corridors, trembling through pots and pans until the very spoons rattled in their jars. Lyra froze mid-stir, the ladle dripping stew back into the pot. The sound wasn't just noise, it was pain. And though she tried to keep stirring, her hands wouldn't move. "Moon save us, not again," muttered Maeve, the head cook, slamming her palms against the counter. 3 hours and counting. That child's cry will drive the alpha mad." The other servants laughed nervously, pretending not to tremble. "Mad? He already is," one whispered. "He threw a healer out last night for suggesting it was the pup's mother he missed." Lyra winced. She'd heard the story. Everyone had. The Luna's death was still spoken of in hushed tones. How she'd bled beneath the red moon. How the alpha's howl had split the heavens. And now, her child cried every night as though calling for her. Still, Lyra couldn't ignore the sound. Every instinct inside her, every fragile, trembling piece of her Omega soul, ached to go to him. "Stop staring at the ceiling," Maeve snapped. "The alpha doesn't need your pity, girl. He needs obedience." "I wasn't," Lyra began, but the woman's glare silenced her. "Wash the carrots. Keep your nose out of alpha matters." "Yes, Maeve." Even so, her gaze lingered upward. The walls here were thick, but not thick enough to muffle that desperate sound. At the far end of the kitchen, the other Omegas huddled near the fire, whispering. "He's cursed," said one, a small woman with soot on her cheek. "The moon goddess took the Luna and left her grief in the child's lungs." "That's blasphemy," hissed another. Hush before someone hears. But Lyra didn't move. She just listened, heart thudding in rhythm with the pup's sobs. Something in her blood stirred, something primal. Her wolf pressed against her chest. Go to him. She shook her head quickly, whispering back, I can't. Yet the ache didn't fade. The sound wasn't ordinary. It wasn't just an infant's cry, it was a call, one that clawed straight into her bones. Why do you care? Maeve's voice sliced through her trance. You think the alpha would thank you if you went near his heir? He'd have your head. Lyra's voice faltered. He sounds scared. That earned a bitter laugh from one of the dish girls. An alpha's pup? Scared? They're born with fangs sharper than ours. Don't be foolish. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was foolish. But still, she couldn't unhear it, the rhythm of pain that echoed like a heartbeat she somehow shared. Before she could stop herself, she murmured a melody, soft, wordless, half-remembered. Her mother's lullaby. The other Omegas glanced over. One smiled faintly, but Maeve's hand came down hard on the table. No songs in my kitchen. Lyra fell silent, but the lullaby still played inside her, quiet and persistent. And though she returned to her chores, her thoughts lingered in the halls above. Because of that sound, because of that child, because her instincts wouldn't let her rest. What she didn't know was that fate had already heard her hum, and it had begun to turn. Chapter 5: Whispers of Punishment. By morning, the castle buzzed with rumors. The Alpha had nearly torn apart the nursery in rage. The Beta had summoned healers from 3 neighboring packs. The child still cried. And now, people whispered that anyone who failed to quiet him would be banished. Lyra tried to ignore it, but fear spread like spilled wine through the kitchen. Did you hear? He threatened the guards, Maev hissed. Said if his son doesn't rest tonight, heads will roll. That can't be true, someone muttered. Oh, it's true, Maev said grimly. And you, girl, she pointed at Lyra, keep your mouth shut and your head down. The Alpha's wrath is no joke. Yes, Maev. Still, Lyra's pulse raced. Because the more they spoke of his fury, the louder the baby's cry grew in her mind. High, sharp, endless. It was as if she could feel it echoing through her chest. She tried scrubbing dishes, but her hands shook. She tried peeling vegetables, but her knife slipped. Everything around her blurred beneath the rhythm of that sound. Lyra, Maeve barked, focus. Sorry. But how could she focus when every instinct screamed that the pup needed her, that something unseen was wrong? That night, as the fires dimmed, she lingered by the staircase leading upward. The castle above loomed like a beast, vast, cold, forbidden. Omegas were never to ascend beyond the servants' floor. Still, she looked up. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking, whispered a stable hand behind her. Lyra startled. What? You keep staring up there every time the pup cries. Don't. You'll get yourself killed. I wouldn't. But her voice faltered, because she would, and maybe she already knew it. The man sighed. You're too soft, Lyra. The world doesn't reward softness. He turned away, but she stood there long after he left, eyes tracing the stairs. The sound drifted down again, thin, trembling, weak now. Something inside her broke, because it wasn't just the pup she heard anymore. It was the Luna's memory, her mother's song. Every heartbeat of loss that ever whispered through the moon goddess's children. And the longer she listened, the clearer it became. If no one went to him, he would cry until his voice gave out, because he wasn't crying from hunger. He was crying from loneliness. And maybe, just maybe, from grief. Chapter 6. The Choice to Disobey. The Alpha's roar shook the castle. It happened just before midnight, a sound that tore through stone and bone alike. Lyra dropped the stack of plates she was carrying. They shattered across the floor. But no one yelled. No one moved. The servants froze, pale and trembling. "Again?" whispered someone. "Worse," said Maev. "He's losing control." The pup's cries joined the alpha's rage, two wails merging into one storm of sound. Lyra's heart pounded. She didn't even realize she was moving until she stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, her apron clutched in one hand. The other Omegas stared in horror. "Don't!" Maev hissed. "He'll destroy you." "I can't stay here. Lyra!" But she was already climbing. The marble steps were cold beneath her bare feet, each one gleaming under torchlight. With every step, the cry grew louder, piercing, desperate, like a heartbeat against her skull. By the time she reached the upper landing, her whole body was trembling. Guards stood by the corridor ahead, their faces grim. "You shouldn't be here," one warned. "I just want to help," she said softly. "Please." "Help?" He barked a bitter laugh. "Help an alpha's heir? You're an Omega. Touch him and you'll die." She met his gaze, eyes steady. "Then let me die trying." Before they could react, she slipped past them, heart hammering. The corridor stretched long and silver, lined with banners that bore the crest of the Silver Crest Pack, the same crest she'd cleaned 1,000 times from plates in the kitchen. Yet up close, it looked different. Heavy. Sacred. As she neared the double doors of the nursery, the sound struck her full force, a raw cry that shook her bones. Her instincts surged. Her wolf pressed forward, fierce and maternal. Without thinking, she pushed open the door. Inside, chaos reigned. Servants scattered like frightened birds. The alpha stood in the center, face shadowed, eyes burning gold. The child wailed in his arms, tiny body rigid with exhaustion. For a moment, time stopped. Every gaze turned to her. Every breath stilled. Lyra didn't know what scared her more, the silence that followed, or the fire in his eyes. But her voice didn't shake when she whispered, "Alpha, let me try." Chapter 7. The Throne Room of Fury. The sound hit her first. Low, guttural, wild. It wasn't the pup's cry this time, it was his. Alpha Raiden's roar cracked through the grand hall like thunder-splitting stone. Servants dropped to their knees, guards stiffened. Even the fire in the torches shuddered, their flames bowing low. The pup screamed louder, a fragile echo tangled with his father's rage. Lyra froze in the doorway, breath caught in her throat. The air itself seemed to bend beneath the alpha's power. It pressed against her chest, hot and heavy, like invisible hands warning her to turn back. But she didn't. She couldn't. Her feet moved on instinct, one trembling step, then another, while the marble floor reflected her small frame in its polished surface. Every inch she crossed felt like a sin. At the far end, Raiden stood before the throne, cloak dark as night, eyes burning molten gold. His son writhed in his arms, tiny fists clenched, face red with exhaustion. The alpha's jaw tightened as he snarled at his staff. 3 hours! His voice boomed. 3 hours, and none of you can silence him. We tried, Alpha, whimpered the head healer. He will not rest. Then he will learn, Raiden barked, his fangs flashing. Even heirs must obey their Alpha. Gasps swept through the room. But what frightened them most wasn't the words. It was the crack in his voice, because grief sounded too much like fury. Lyra's heart hammered. He's breaking. Before she could think, the door creaked behind her. All eyes swung her way. An Omega, covered in flour and kitchen ash, standing where no Omega should ever stand. The guards stiffened. The betas whispered. Someone hissed, "Get her out." Yet she didn't move. Her voice came soft, trembling, but it carried. Alpha. Raiden turned, and for a moment she saw the storm inside him, a man made of power and ruin. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am Lyra," she whispered, "from the kitchens. You dare enter this hall." His growl rolled through the air, vibrating in her ribs. The pup wailed harder. and something in her snapped. Before she could stop herself, she said the words that sealed her fate. "Then let me help." The hall fell silent. Chapter 8. Let me try. No one breathed. The alpha's gaze locked on her, a predator studying prey. Lyra's legs nearly gave out, but her wolf pushed forward, whispering through the bond of instinct. "Don't look away." So she didn't. "I beg your forgiveness, Alpha," she said softly, "but he's in pain. Let me try." Gasps rippled through the court. One beta stepped forward, voice sharp. "She can't. It's forbidden for an Omega to touch royal blood." Another added, "She'll taint the heir's scent." Lyra's pulse raced, but she lifted her chin. "Then banish me after. Just let me try before he breaks." Raiden's growl deepened. "You think my son is weak?" "I think he's lonely," she said, surprising even herself. "He can feel your anger." For a heartbeat, the alpha didn't move. His chest rose once, twice, and the fury in his eyes flickered. Exhaustion crept in where rage had lived. Finally, he spoke, hoarse, dangerous. "If you fail—" "I know," she said. Without another word, she stepped closer. The crowd parted, fear and disbelief chasing her shadow. The distance between them closed, one breath at a time. When she reached the throne, she stopped. Her eyes dropped to the crying child in his arms. His tiny face was flushed, his breaths ragged. She raised her hands slowly. "May I?" Raiden hesitated. The hall waited. The pup screamed. And then, he let go. The child slid into her arms, weightless yet heavy with the power of every gaze upon them. The instant her skin brushed his, warmth surged through her veins. Her wolf gasped awake inside her, whispering, "Moon above." "He's so small." She rocked him gently, the way her mother once had when storms raged over their old village. The room blurred. She saw only him. Her lips parted, and before fear could stop her, she began to hum. Chapter 9. The cry falls silent. It was barely a sound at first, just breath and trembling melody. But then, as if summoned, the song took shape. A lunar lullaby. Old, sacred, almost forgotten. The notes floated through the chamber like strands of silver smoke. They wrapped around pillars, drifted past firelight, softened even the alpha's heartbeat. Lyra swayed gently, voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the child's breath. The melody wasn't magic, not in the way spells were, but it carried something older. The pulse of wolves under the moon, the ache of mothers who had sung through loss, the promise that no cry went unheard. And just like that, the pup stopped crying. His tiny body stilled. His eyelids fluttered. A sigh escaped his lips, the first sound of peace the castle had heard since the Luna's death. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was holy. The court stared, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend. Raiden's hands hung useless at his sides, his expression torn between awe and disbelief. The gold in his eyes dimmed to silver, the color of surrender. The baby cooed once, small and content, nuzzling into Lyra's arm. She looked down, tears blurring her vision. "He's safe." Someone whispered, "The Omega did it." Another gasped, "Impossible." The head healer dropped to his knees. "By the moon." Raiden silenced them with a glance, but his voice came softer than anyone had ever heard it. "What did you do?" Lyra knelt, still holding the child. "Nothing, Alpha. I just sang. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't cursed. He was lonely." Her words echoed in the vaulted chamber. Lonely. The Alpha swallowed hard, his throat tight. "He felt me." "Yes," she whispered. "He cries because your heart does." The silence stretched, deep and raw. Even the fire crackled quietly, as if afraid to intrude. Raiden looked at her then, not as an Omega, not as a servant, but as something else entirely, someone who had stepped through every law and reached his son when he could not. For the first time in years, the mighty Alpha of Silvercrest bowed his head, and the castle that had known only grief finally breathed. Chapter 10. The Court Shock Silence. It fell like snowfall, soft, absolute, and unthinkable. The pup no longer cried. He slept, peacefully, in the arms of an omega. For a heartbeat, no one dared move. The court's disbelief bordered on fear. Every law, every tradition carved into Silvercrest stone, shattered in a single act of defiance wrapped in lullaby. Lyra remained kneeling, breath unsteady, arms still cradling the air as if the world might break him again. Her heart thundered, yet she dared not lift her gaze. "By the moon!" someone whispered. The Beta commander turned to the Alpha, eyes wide. "My lord, this cannot be allowed." "Quiet," Raiden said. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to silence the room. His gaze stayed fixed on the girl before him. The scent of her, warm earth and rain, filled the air between them, softening the sharpness of his grief. His son slept in her arms without fear, without pain, without him. How? He was the Alpha of the North. His word was law. His will was unbroken. And yet one trembling Omega had undone him with nothing but a song. A shiver of anger, or maybe awe, ran through him. "Stand," he ordered. Lyra rose slowly, clutching the child protectively. Her knees wobbled. Every noble in the hall stared, their eyes wide with horror. The Beta commander stepped forward again, desperation in his tone. "Alpha! She violated the law of rank. She touched royal blood without permission. She must be punished." Raiden turned his head slightly. "Would you prefer the air still cry?" The Beta's mouth opened, then closed. Raiden took a step closer, the echo of his boots rolling through the chamber. He stopped only a breath away from her. His golden eyes caught the firelight, turning amber at the edges. "What did you do to my son?" he asked quietly. Her lips trembled, but her voice held. "I sang to him, my lord. That's all? That's all I know how to do." The simplicity of it hit harder than any confession. Raiden's wolf stirred beneath his skin, uneasy. He wanted to call it manipulation, coincidence, sorcery. Anything but what it was. Compassion. Yet when he looked at the pup in her arms, tiny and peaceful, his heart stuttered. The impossible had happened before his eyes, and for the first time in years, he had no command to give. Chapter 11. The Truth of the Cry. The council chamber still smelled of shock when Raiden dismissed the crowd. One by one, nobles and guards bowed out, whispering prayers to the moon goddess, crossing themselves as they passed the Omega girl who had silenced the Alpha's heir. Only she remained now. Lyra knelt once more before the throne, the baby sleeping quietly in her arms. The firelight made her hair gleam copper gold. Raiden descended from the dais, his footsteps measured. The heat of his presence reached her before his shadow did. He stopped a few feet away. "Look at me." She hesitated, then lifted her gaze. Her eyes, soft, unguarded, met his. "Explain yourself," he said. "I can't explain what I don't understand," she murmured. "But I know what I felt." "What did you feel?" His tone was sharp, but curiosity burned beneath it. She swallowed. He wasn't hungry, Alpha. He wasn't ill. He was grieving. The word struck him like a blade. "Grieving?" She nodded. "He feels your grief. The bond between Alpha and heir is strong, stronger than most blood ties. He cries because your heart does." Her words hung in the air, shimmering like light on water. Raiden's jaw tightened. He wanted to dismiss her, to reject the idea entirely. But deep down, the truth clawed at him. He hadn't held his son since the Luna's death. He hadn't dared. Not once. He looked at the child now, sleeping peacefully against her chest, and for the first time realized what the boy had been asking for all along. Not food, not comfort, but connection. Ryden turned away, pacing toward the hearth. You speak as though you know loss. Her fingers brushed the child's hair gently. Every Omega knows it, my lord. We're born into it. He looked back at her, surprise flickering across his features. She lowered her eyes. My mother died when I was 12. She used to sing that lullaby when I couldn't sleep. She said the moon listens better when the song comes from the heart. The Alpha said nothing for a long while. The only sound was the quiet crackle of fire and the steady breathing of the child. Finally, he exhaled. You risked your life to come here. Yes. Why? Lyra hesitated. Because no one else did. Something fractured quietly in his chest. Without warning, the child stirred. Ryden stepped forward instinctively, his wolf reacting before thought. Lyra froze, unsure if she should release him, but the Alpha's hands came up slowly, almost awkwardly. May I? He asked. The court would have fainted if they'd heard him. But here, in the quiet, only she nodded and handed him the child. His son's warmth seeped through his armor of grief. The pup nuzzled into his father's chest, still half asleep. Ryden's throat tightened. Peace, Lyra whispered softly, is not weakness, Alpha. He looked down at her. You think you know peace? No, she said, but I know what breaks it. The truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time since the Luna's death, Ryden's wolf stopped pacing. Chapter 12. The Tear. He hid that night. The castle slept for the first time in months. Snow drifted against the window panes. The torches burned low, their light soft and golden. Ryden stood by the cradle, arms folded, watching his son sleep in the silence Lyra had left behind. He hadn't dismissed her completely, only sent her back to the servants' quarters with orders for rest. But her scent still lingered here, faint as moonlight, wildflowers and warmth. The Alpha leaned forward, brushing a stray lock of silver hair from his child's forehead. You were crying for her, he murmured, and I was too blind to see it. The baby sighed in his sleep. Ryden straightened, exhaling slowly. He turned toward the window, his reflection framed in the glass. Gold eyes dulled with exhaustion, the faintest cracks of something human showing through the mask. The weight he'd carried for months seemed to shift slightly, not gone but moved like a mountain learning to breathe again. As he stood there, he felt the sting before he realized what it was. A tear. Just one. He caught it with his thumb, angry at himself, but the warmth of it spread through his chest before he could stop it. Outside, the moon glowed high and full, silver and still. For a moment, it seemed to watch him, to judge him, maybe even forgive him. Don't look at me like that, he whispered to the sky. You sent her, didn't you? He didn't expect an answer, but in the quiet that followed, a faint hum echoed down the corridor, a lullaby drifting faintly from the servants' quarters. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. And though the mighty Alpha of the North would never admit it aloud, he wept. Chapter 13. The Rumor of the Omega. By dawn, the castle no longer belonged to silence, it belonged to whispers. They darted through corridors like fireflies, glowing brighter with every retelling. The Omega silenced the air. She dared to touch him. They say the Alpha didn't punish her. Even the walls seemed to listen. Lyra kept her head down as she scrubbed the flagstones outside the kitchens, but her name followed her like smoke. The other servants avoided her now, not out of hatred but fear. No one wanted to stand too close to a girl the Alpha had spared. Lyra! She jumped. Maev stood behind her, face pale, voice thin. You're wanted in the great hall. Her hands froze around the cloth. Now? Maev nodded once. The Alpha called for you himself. The kitchen fell still. Every head turned. One of the younger girls whispered, "Don't go." Another muttered, "If he doesn't kill her, he'll claim her." Lyra tried not to listen. Her heart pounded so hard she thought they'd hear it echo through the floor. "What does he want with me?" Maev only shook her head. "If I knew, I'd tell you to run." But she didn't run. Because deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the trembling, something stronger stirred. The same instinct that had guided her to that crying child last night whispered again, "Go." As she climbed the marble staircase, the air seemed heavier, thick with judgment and awe. The castle guards opened the great doors, and she stepped into the hall where the Alpha and his council waited. Every noble eye fixed on her, every heartbeat slowed. Raiden Voss stood before his throne, cloak draped across broad shoulders, silver light spilling over him like armor. His gaze found her immediately, and didn't look away. "Lyra," he said. Her knees almost gave out hearing her name on his tongue. Chapter 14. The Alpha's Decision. The council chamber was a storm contained in stone. Betas lined the walls, their expressions sharp with disapproval. Nobles stood whispering in corners, the sound like dry leaves. Only Raiden stood still, calm, unreadable, the eye of the storm. "Bring her forward," he commanded. Lyra stepped closer, each movement deliberate, her palms slick against the skirt of her dress. The child's lullaby still hummed faintly in her chest, as though echoing through her heart. The Beta commander bowed low. "Alpha, forgive me, but she defied every law. The punishment for her offense must be mine to decide," Raiden interrupted. The man flinched and fell silent. Raiden's gaze drifted back to Lyra. "You entered my hall without permission. You touched my son. You broke the oldest rule in Silvercrest history." She bowed her head. "Yes, Alpha." "Tell me," he said, voice lower now. "Why shouldn't I punish you?" Her answer came soft but certain. "Because I didn't do it to defy you. I did it to save him." The words were simple, but they struck like thunder. One of the nobles scoffed. "An Omega claiming righteousness? You give them mercy, they'll think themselves equal." Raiden's golden eyes cut toward him, and the man's voice died mid-breath. The Alpha turned back to her. "You would risk death for him?" "I would risk anything," she said. "No child should cry alone." Silence followed. It wasn't fear this time. It was awe. Raiden exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he'd held too long. Then he turned toward his council. "She will not be punished." The uproar came instantly. Shouts of disbelief, hisses of outrage, the sound of wolves barely holding their form. "Alpha, this defies pack order," cried one. "The others will rebel." "Then let them." His voice cracked like a whip. When the hall fell still again, Raiden lifted a hand toward Lyra. "From this day forward, she will serve as caretaker of the air." Gasps filled the air. One noblewoman's hand flew to her chest. The Beta commander looked ready to faint. Raiden's gaze hardened. She succeeded where bloodlines failed. Let her rank be defined by worth, not by birth. Lyra's breath caught. "Alpha," but he wasn't finished. "You will live within the nursery quarters, close to my son. You will answer only to me." That last part hung heavier than the rest. Her pulse skipped. The council's silence deepened. When she finally found her voice, it came as a whisper. "I serve at your command." And when her eyes met his, something unspoken passed between them, something that had nothing to do with duty at all. Chapter 15. A New Kind of Fear. By nightfall, every candle in the castle burned lower than usual. Whispers crawled through the halls, softer now, but no less dangerous. "She lives with the air." The Alpha trusts her. He looks at her differently. Lyra heard it all. The nursery was quiet, the pup sleeping peacefully in his cradle. She sat beside him, watching the faint rise and fall of his chest. Every so often, she hummed under her breath, too softly for anyone else to hear. At the doorway, 2 guards stood stationed by order of the Alpha himself. Their expressions betrayed confusion, more than hostility. No one quite knew what to make of her. She still couldn't believe it herself. Just a day ago, she'd been a nameless servant. Now, the castle bowed to her without meeting her eyes. Fear had changed its shape. It no longer came from punishment. It came from importance. Because the higher she was lifted, the further she could fall. Does he still sleep? The deep voice rolled through the quiet. She turned sharply. Raiden stood in the doorway, cloak loose, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Alpha," she murmured, rising. His gaze flicked to the child, then back to her. "Good." He walked closer, each step measured. The scent of rain and pine followed him, wrapping around her like a storm she couldn't escape. "He doesn't cry in your presence," Raiden said softly, almost to himself. "Not once." Lyra swallowed. Maybe he feels safe. His eyes lifted to hers. "And you? Do you feel safe here?" The question caught her off guard. "Should I not?" "That depends," he said, voice low. "On whether you trust the one guarding you." Her pulse stuttered. "Do you mean you?" He gave a faint smile, more shadow than warmth. "There's no one else I'd trust him with. Or you." The words hung between them, thick with something neither dared name. A gust of wind brushed through the window, carrying the faint howl of distant wolves. Raiden turned toward the cradle, his hand resting on the carved edge. The moonlight painted silver across his hair. Lyra watched him silently. The proud, untouchable Alpha looked almost human in that light. "Rest," he said finally, his tone gentle now. "You've done enough for one lifetime." She bowed her head. "Yes, Alpha." But as he turned to leave, her voice slipped out, barely audible, trembling. "Why me?" He paused. Without turning, he said, "Because when everyone else heard a cry, you heard a heart." Then he was gone. Lyra stood in the quiet nursery, the moonlight spilling like silver silk across her hands. The pup sighed in his sleep, and though she didn't know why, her own eyes stung with tears. Because something inside her whispered that this peace would not last. That love, in a castle built on power, was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 16. The Night of Storms. The storm came without warning. Lightning ripped open the sky, flashing white across the towers of Silvercrest Castle. Thunder followed, shaking the walls until dust rained from the rafters. Lyra woke to the pup's cry, thin, weak, and unfamiliar. It wasn't the loud wail of hunger. It was softer, rasping, frightened. She rushed to the cradle. The child's skin was burning hot, his breaths shallow. Sweat glistened across his tiny forehead. "No, no," she whispered, pressing a hand to his chest. His heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. Within moments, the healers filled the room. Herbs, ointments, spells whispered under trembling breaths. None of it worked. "The fever worsens," cried the eldest healer. "It's beyond mortal cure." Raiden stormed into the nursery, cloak drenched from rain. "What happened?" "My lord," the healer stammered. "We've done all we can." The Alpha's eyes went wild. "You call this all?" He slammed a hand against the wall, the thunder outside echoing his rage. "He's my heir!" The healers fell silent. Fear swallowed the air. Lyra clutched the child close, tears streaking her cheeks. "Please," she whispered to the infant. "Hold on." The wind howled through the broken shutters. Candle flames sputtered and died. For an instant, only lightning lit the room, blue-white, ghostly, merciless. Then the pup's cry faded. "Do something!" Raiden shouted. But no one moved. No one dared. Lyra's voice cracked as she cried, "The moon will hear me!" Every head turned toward her. "What did you say?" Raiden demanded. She met his eyes, trembling but unbroken. The moon hears the cries of wolves when men fail them. Before anyone could stop her, she laid the child on a silver-lined cloth by the window. Moonlight spilled across his body like a blessing waiting to be claimed. Chapter 17, The Moonlight Ritual. The storm outside raged like a beast denied. Lyra knelt beside the child, the window thrown open to the tempest. Rain lashed her face, mingling with tears as she began to sing. The same lullaby, but slower now, older. Each note vibrated with something more than sound. Magic stirred in the air, soft but deep. The heartbeat of the moon herself. "She's invoking the old rite," one healer gasped. "It's forbidden." Raiden stepped forward, torn between fury and desperation. "What are you doing?" Lyra didn't answer. Her voice rose, trembling, as she cut her palm with a shard of silver glass. Blood welled crimson against the pale glow. Then, whispering through the wind, she said, "Moon above, mother of all wolves, bind my breath to his. Take from me what he needs to live." She pressed her hand to the child's chest. Her blood glimmered in the light, then spread, tracing glowing runes across his skin. The silver shimmered, the fever broke. Gasps filled the room. The healers fell to their knees. Raiden's wolf surged within him, half in awe, half in terror. "You're killing yourself!" he shouted, lunging forward. Lyra's eyes flicked to his, calm, resigned. "Then let my death buy his tomorrow." Her body trembled. The wind roared louder, pulling strands of her hair into the moonlight. Her song faltered, then steadied again. When the lightning struck, it didn't hit the castle. It hit the sky itself, a column of light connecting heaven and earth. And for one sacred heartbeat, the Alpha, the Omega, and the air were bound by the same pulse. The pup's cry returned, soft, alive, steady. Lyra smiled faintly. Then everything went dark. Chapter 18, The Alpha Kneels. Lyra. Her name tore from his throat. Raiden caught her just before she hit the floor, her body limp, her skin cold. Her blood stained his hands crimson. The healers scrambled forward, but he waved them away. "Don't touch her!" He cradled her close, the pup sleeping safely in the cradle behind them. "You saved him again," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You foolish, fearless girl." Her eyelids fluttered weakly. "Is he alive?" "Yes," he breathed. "Because of you." A faint smile touched her lips. Then it was worth it. Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath shallow but steady. Raiden's world tilted. The storm outside softened, the thunder fading to a distant murmur. The moonlight that had burned so bright now glowed gently, washing over them in silver peace. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering words no one had ever heard from the Alpha of the North. "You saved my blood, my air, my heart." Tears slid down his cheeks, unhidden this time. "Even the gods should bow to you." The healers, watching in silence, would later swear the moonlight brightened at those words, as if the goddess herself had accepted his vow. For that single night, the castle forgot rank, law, and lineage. It remembered only a song, and the girl who sang life back into a dying child. Chapter 19, Guardian of the Air. The first dawn after the storm broke soft and golden. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, brushing over the marble floors like forgiveness made light. The castle woke to quiet awe. No one spoke of miracles aloud, but every servant knew the truth. The Omega girl had saved the air. Again. When Raiden entered the great hall that morning, the court gathered instinctively. Their eyes flicked toward him, then toward the fragile figure behind, Lyra pale but standing. She wore no jewels, no rank insignia. Only a plain gray gown, the hem damp from the courtyard dew. Yet the entire chamber seemed to bow without command. Raiden took the dais, voice echoing through the still air. "Hear me," he said, The pup of Silvercrest lives. A murmur rippled through the hall. Gratitude, disbelief, wonder. And he lives, Ryden continued. Because of her. Lyra lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. The alpha stepped aside, extending his hand toward her. Lyra of No House, he declared, is hereby named Guardian of the Air. Her life will be protected as fiercely as his own. Any who harm her will answer to me. Gasps filled the chamber. Several nobles stepped forward, protesting under their breath. Alpha, she's an Omega. The pack will revolt. Then let them revolt, Ryden said evenly. Their howls will die before mine does. The words carried the weight of thunder. The hall went silent, and in that silence, something ancient shifted. The hierarchy that had ruled for generations trembled, not from rebellion, but reverence. When the crowd dispersed, Lyra stood alone by the window, the pup asleep in her arms. The world beyond the glass shimmered with sunlight. She whispered to the child, "You've given me a name." Behind her, Ryden's voice answered quietly, "And purpose." Chapter 20. The Alpha's confession days passed like pages turning in a quiet book. The fever never returned. The pup thrived, laughing, reaching, cooing whenever Lyra entered the room. The once haunted castle now breathed warmth again. Yet it wasn't only the child who healed. Ryden found himself drawn, again and again, to the sound of her voice. It carried peace into places inside him he had long sealed shut. One evening, he lingered in the doorway as she sang the moon song softly, the air asleep against her shoulder. The fire cast gold halos around them both. "You've given him peace," he murmured, stepping forward. She turned, startled, but didn't bow. "He deserves it." Ryden's gaze softened. "And me? You've given me something I cannot name." She hesitated. "I have given nothing, Alpha. Only done what was right." "That is precisely what I've forgotten how to do," he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavy, personal. He walked closer until the firelight blurred between them. "When I lost the Luna, I thought I'd buried every gentle thing inside me. But when you touched my son, something in me remembered how to feel." Her breath caught. "You should not say such things." "Why?" he asked. "Because people will talk." "They already do," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Lyra looked away, her voice trembling. "You are Alpha, I am Omega. Between us stands a world." He tilted his head. "Then perhaps it's time the world moved." Her heart stuttered. "Don't, please." "Lyra." His voice was rough now, the edge of restraint visible even through the quiet. "I owe you everything, but what I feel—" "Stop," she whispered. "If you speak it, I cannot unhear it." For a long moment, only the fire crackled. Then Ryden stepped back, his composure returning like armor sliding into place. "Very well," he said. "Then hear this instead. No harm will ever touch you again. That is my vow." She bowed her head, but her heart betrayed her with the tremor of longing she couldn't hide. Chapter 21. The Forbidden Flame. The moon returned to fullness a week later. The castle glowed in her light, silver washing over the ramparts, spilling through the nursery windows. Lyra sat by the cradle, humming as the pup slept. Ryden stood in the doorway again, silent, watching, the wolf in him restless. He shouldn't have been there, but he couldn't stay away. Her song wove through the air like silk, gentle, luminous, dangerous. Each note seemed to pull at something deeper inside him, something primal. When she noticed him, her voice faltered. "You shouldn't linger here, my lord." "And yet I do." His footsteps were soft as he approached. The firelight flickered against the edges of his jaw, tracing the scar she'd never noticed before. "You sing to the moon as if she listens," he said. "She always listens," Lyra replied quietly. "Even to those who shouldn't speak." Their eyes met, The world seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the pup shifted in his sleep, reaching a tiny hand toward the air. Lyra leaned forward to adjust his blanket, and Ryden's fingers brushed hers. It was a fleeting touch, accidental, harmless. And yet, the bond between them flared like starlight in their veins. Lyra froze, her breath catching. Ryden's pulse thundered in his ears. She withdrew her hand as though burned. "You can't," she whispered. "I know. But you want to." He said nothing. Silence was his answer. The pup sighed softly, curling into peaceful dreams. Lyra turned away, clutching the edge of the cradle for strength. "If this continues, they'll call me a curse." Ryden's voice came low, rough, and final. "Then let them. I've lived under curses before, but never something this worth the risk." The moonlight brightened, spilling silver fire across their faces. Two souls caught between duty and desire, standing on the edge of ruin and rebirth. And somewhere deep within, the goddess herself smiled. Chapter 22. The Castle of Whispers. The castle that once echoed with wails now breathed peace. Where once there were rumors of scandal, now there were whispers of miracle. Servants no longer spoke Lyra's name in fear but in reverence. The Omega, who had silenced the air, had also silenced the Alpha's grief. The pup grew stronger by the day, laughing easily, sleeping deeply. The healers called it divine intervention. The guards called it witchcraft. But those who had seen the truth in the Alpha's eyes knew better, because the Alpha himself had changed. Ryden walked through the halls no longer as a storm, but as the calm that follows one. His voice, once an instrument of command, had softened. His gaze, once sharp as steel, now carried warmth, the kind that frightened him more than any battle ever had. Each morning, he would find himself standing quietly by the nursery door, watching Lyra cradle his son. Her hair caught the dawn like strands of spun gold, her hum the only sound the boy needed to smile. Even the council noticed. They didn't dare speak of it aloud, but the air between them carried unspoken understanding. Power had shifted. Not through conquest, but compassion. And though no one said it, everyone knew. The Silvercrest pack was changing. Not because of the Alpha's strength, but because of the Omega's heart. Chapter 23, The Song Beneath the Moon. That night, the moon rose high, round and radiant, draped in silver mist. The castle slept beneath her glow, save for one small light in the highest tower. Lyra stood by the open window, the air asleep in her arms. The child's little hand curled around her finger as she began to sing. The melody floated through the air, gentle as breath. It drifted past the stone arches, across the courtyard, into the cold night where wolves howled in distant harmony. Ryden, walking the ramparts below, stopped in his tracks. The sound reached him like a memory, that same lullaby, the song that had once silenced his son, that had once stilled his rage, that had once pulled him back from the edge of despair. He closed his eyes and listened. Each note felt like a confession he could never speak. Every wordless hum held the tenderness he was too proud to show. As he stood beneath the window, moonlight poured over him, and for the first time in years the Alpha bowed his head, not in defeat, but in devotion. He realized then that command could inspire obedience, but only love could inspire loyalty. When the song ended, he whispered into the night, "If the moon herself envies you, I would not blame her." Unseen above, Lyra paused, as if she'd heard his heart instead of his voice. The air stirred in her arms and smiled in his sleep, and somewhere between their heartbeats the old world broke, and a new one was born. Chapter 24. The Alpha's heartbeat days passed. The stormy season ended. Spring returned to Silvercrest, painting the hills in green and gold. In the courtyard, laughter rang, soft, high, innocent. The heir toddled across the grass, his little feet unsteady but determined. Lyra followed close, her laughter mingling with his. Ryden stood by the archway, watching. His heart was too full for words. Once, this courtyard had been his battlefield, a place of drills and discipline. Now it was his peace. Lyra looked up and caught his gaze. The smile that met his was small, but it reached her eyes. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to the space between them. He crossed the courtyard slowly. When he reached her, he stopped just close enough to feel her breath. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what, Alpha?" "For everything I didn't know I'd lost." She blinked, emotion shimmering in her eyes. "You didn't lose it. You just forgot how to see it." He looked down at his son, then back to her. "And you reminded me." The wind carried the scent of rain and pine. The wolves beyond the walls howled, not in mourning, but in song. Ryden lifted his gaze to the horizon where the moon rose pale against the dusk. The child stopped crying. He murmured, almost to himself. Lyra tilted her head. "What was that?" He smiled faintly, his voice breaking into something raw, something human. "But the wolf inside me finally learned to feel." Lyra's breath caught, not from surprise but from the truth of it. The moonlight wrapped them both in silver calm, the child between them, living proof that love, in any form, defies rank, rule, and reason. And as the night settled over Silvercrest Castle, the legend of the Omega and the Alpha's heir became more than a story. It became the song of a new era, a song that began with a cry and ended with a heartbeat.